So I want to welcome you all this evening. Fran Patnaude is going to be our speaker and a dear friend. I do want to remind you that the exhibit that you see in the back, Reggie Delarme will be giving a talk on November 10th about her work. So if you're interested, there are cards. And Fran, as you may know, teaches at WestConn, has taught there for many years, and also is the head of the art department at Rumsey Hall in Washington. He continues his training at the Zen Mountain Monastery in the 8 Gates training method and has studied Japanese brush method. His work has been exhibited in all kinds of places, and it's a large resume. I'm going to leave it over there if somebody would like to look at it. But I'd rather listen to Fran talk about his work. So, Fran.
Thanks. Okay. So let's start off. Let's go into some silence here just to set the stage, okay? So let's go for maybe for a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And this is it's called an Inca bell. An Inca bell is it's a small one, and in Zen Buddhist training, meditation, this bell signifies the beginning of a sitting period and the end, among other things. It's an instrument that is used pretty extensively to alert everyone that things are changing or that things are beginning and so forth. Okay, so what I want you to do is just to be present, but just to really kind of let that sound. So you can keep your eyes open, close, it doesn't matter. So I'll start it with the bell, and we'll see how that goes. I've been investigating silence as a tool in my art practice, in my life, and it's been very interesting how that's evolved, because really silence is something that gives you, I think, a space. It allows your awareness to grow and allows you to be able to see what's happening. A lot of times when we are confronted with intense things, they're too close. We can't see them or work with them. So how do you resolve that? Somehow you need to settle yourself down, to ground yourself so that you're able to engage in a different way than just being a victim or being pushed around or being carried away by momentums that are just very powerful. Silence is like anything else. I mean, it takes time to cultivate that. I mean, so many times you go somewhere and there's a moment of silence. But what I'm talking about here is actually a concentrated practice of cultivating silence. I think over time you find that it's not only something that allows you to be much more grounded, but also to see the connections between things, and that's really the whole point. So whenever I give a talk, a workshop or whatever, I like to ask a couple questions, and so I'm going to do that. First of all, do you think creativity is an important thing? Raise your hand if you think that's true. Okay, thanks. Do you think creativity is something worth developing? Raise your hand. I mean, I've never had anyone say that that's not true. I mean, everywhere you go, you ask people that. That's what they say, right? So let's see. So how many classes have you taken in creativity over the years?
Taken or teach?
Taken, in terms of just, in other words, a program or some sort of sequence of classes that refine
one.
One.
I teach one every semester.
Okay. Anyone else? I mean, in elementary school, did you take any creativity classes, or junior high, or high school? No. Everybody thinks it's really important. You don't find anybody that doesn't, and yet, when you start to look at it, it's just not addressed at all. And the thing is that if you throw it out to people, which I will do eventually here, what is creativity? I mean, there was one time I was at a talk where, you know, if the person leading the talk hadn't stepped up, there would have been fistfights in terms of who was right and who was wrong. And it's a very intense thing, particularly right now, because creativity is, in many ways, the gateway to the development of resolution, of balance, of pushing out for solutions to all the things we're facing. So I'm going to break this talk up into three parts. And one, in terms of just a little bit about myself, in terms of how I got here. I'll show you some artwork, talk about the creative process, and then open it up for maybe some questions and answers. Okay, so how I got here, besides driving here tonight. I came from a background, my parents were very middle-class, blue-collar, and you know, the thought of art being something that was serious to take up just did not enter their awareness. I mean, my mom and dad will still ask me, you know, you're really serious about this art stuff, huh? I said, well, yeah, kind of, you know, it's so I don't know how it happened, really. You know? I mean, I don't know where it came from. I don't know how I was, from the very beginning, you know, drawn to, in an intense way, to art. You know, I just can't quite figure it out. Of course, there's a word for that, Japanese word, yugen. It's mystery. And that's another aspect to the creative process you have to take into account, because it's true. There is things that we cannot know. We don't know. I had a elementary art teacher. He was a guy. He had a beard. And he made paintings that were not of things. They were non-representation. I remember this. And I thought that was so interesting, you know, that it wasn't a picture of anything. And I can remember his voice. And I can remember an incident in kindergarten where I made a helicopter out of a pine cone, and he thought that was great, you know, and it stuck with me. It really stuck with me. So it taught me something that, you know, as a teacher now, I'm very aware of the fact that what I'm saying is having an impact on whatever student I'm talking to. You know? And that feeling of that connection to myself, to my own past, makes me aware when that's happening in that transaction with another student. Because now that I'm teach at Rumsey, been there for a long time, I have students coming back and they'll say to me, well, remember you said that, or whatever to me, and I'll say, oh yeah, I'm not sure what I said, but it made an impact to them. You know, it's something that experience with Al Blanchard, you know, it just stayed with me. How important it is to be conscious and to be aware of the perspective that you're coming from in terms of when you're teaching or just talking. When I was about 13 or 14. There was a neighbor of ours she was actually in a troubled marriage, and she was a nurse, and she was just an amazing person. But she took the time to tell my parents, you know, she's watched me doing all this artwork with you. You should really get your son some art lessons. So I was living in Middletown, Connecticut at the time, and the Wesleyan Potters, which is another fairly big organization there, was offering classes in conjunction with Wesleyan. So there was a teacher there who actually was a student of Nicolaides, who was a very famous figurative and drawing teacher, was teaching it. So, I showed up, I guess I was about 14 or 15, 14 I think it was, and I had my sketchbook and my charcoal, and sat down, and all these people coming in, and I was really nervous, very nervous. So this woman came in, and she was really, 14 years old. She was very attractive to me, and so I was sitting there. All of a sudden, she took her clothes off, and so I just first thought it was, this is the life for me. So thank you, Ellie. Ellie was a lifelong friend. She passed away recently, but seemed to always be there for me. Just as the only way I can describe her was an angel. She really just, and again, it's funny how these people enter your lives. If you're open, if you're willing to kind of go into a sense of things that's a little more subtle, or just oriented towards greater sensitivity things, I guess you could say. When I was in college, I was in college in the early 70s. There was a lot happening, a lot of political stuff and so forth, a lot of social stuff, and I was pretty active in that. And I was studying art, but I was certainly interested in what was happening. And I would have to say that my art production and activities were not the highest priority, although I was keeping myself busy. And I met a guy, a teacher, and I remember going into his class. His name was Michael Scope, and he, I can remember that very first class. He talked about all these things, about philosophy of art, about how important it is to have insight as part of your art procedures and so forth. And I can still remember the feeling from that. It really just really sent me, really resonated with me. And I knew at that moment that he was somebody that I wanted to work with. There was just no question about it. It was the right time, right place. And I ended up studying with him for about 6 years. 3 years in New Haven, and then he had a studio down in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. He was the assistant to Ivan Mestrovic, who was also a protege and student of Auguste Rodin. So his philosophy was coming from that orientation, and I could talk about that at length. But what I realized is that this was a tradition, oral tradition, something you're not going to find in books in terms of what was being said, what was being practiced, and also how to live your life in terms of drawing on not only your inner strength, your inner insight, but also having a connection to nature. So I worked with Mike for 6 years, and I met my lovely wife and all that, and we worked together with him, and it was really an extraordinary experience. It was something that he passed away in 2009, and it was amazing at his memorial to see people that I hadn't seen in 30 years, and the connection was right there. So there's something about not only when you work with somebody who has that kind of insight, but also the fact that there are connections, that you realize that we're all in this together. And also that the function of art is something that allows that to happen. So after that, we left Kentucky, went up to Syracuse, New York, and Kathy and I both went to Syracuse University. And it was there that, in my experiences, I had a contact with a lot of visiting artists. It was a really great experience. I studied for a year with Houston Smith, who was kind of at the forefront of comparative religion, and that was kind of a start of an interest of mine to see how the religious experience comes into play in terms of an artist's inspiration or an artist's practice. And so working with him a little bit, listening to him talk about his immense knowledge about religions and so forth, you really start to see that it isn't so much the religion as it is the insight that's manifested through the practice of these things. I also had a chance to work with a lot of artists, and that I think was also a formative experience, because after I left Syracuse, I ended up welding for about 5 or 6 years. And while I was in Kentucky, I went to a welding school. That was one thing that Mike stressed, was learning everything about everything. So not only the philosophical stuff, but also the technical stuff, how to maintain a studio and so forth. So through Syracuse, I started getting involved with the artists, and for the next 5 or 6 years, I worked for a lot of artists, building large-scale sculpture all over the place. It was very interesting, very hazardous work, but the chance to see artists go through their process of decision-making, and also to learn the amazing technical aspects of building large-scale sculpture was really pretty amazing. So after I decided that my time working for other artists and also welding full-time was at an end, I decided to go in full-time teaching, and that's how I ended up at Rumsey Hall School, and that has turned into be a great experience for me. This is the 24th year I've been teaching there, and it's helped me to appreciate what teaching is all about in terms of giving. And it's a great place too. It's international community, and also I've been given a lot of leeway in terms of how I implement some of my ideas. So it's been very positive, and I think a great experience. In addition to that, as long as I've been teaching at Rumsey, I also started as an adjunct professor over at Western Connecticut State University. So that's been very interesting, because it's helped me to really see into the creative process in terms of working with young kids all day and adults at night. And there are many days when I've literally been able to see the life development of a person's creative nature. Many times, and working with the older kids or adults or whatever I'm dealing with at the college, I can see where some of the places and ways they're stuck really stem from experiences they've had during those middle school years, where really what you're witnessing there is this transition from a child to an adult. So it's very important to see into that, because it helps you to understand exactly what the process involves. Somewhere in there, I got involved with reading different things about philosophy, and even though I knew about the Zen practice and the Zen philosophy, I really wasn't into it. And I was talking to a parent, and she looked at me and said, "Well, you know something about this." And I really had to be honest. I said I didn't. And so Rumsey has a very generous program for graduate studies, and I decided to take a couple courses with a fellow named Lou Nordstrom at Wesleyan. And from working with him, I found the Zen Mountain Monastery, which was created by John Daido Roshi, who's passed away in 2009. And the basis, of course, is a Zen Buddhist orientation, but Daido was a photographer, studied with Minor White, and built a lot of his practice over there around the arts. So that seemed to be, a real interesting thing to investigate. And I've been over there now for about 17 years or so, and work with Conrad Rushin Marche and Jeffrey Shugan Arnold, the principal teachers over there, and they're great people. And the emphasis still is maintained in terms of orientation towards the arts. Right now, in terms of just my own work and what I'm doing, I have a studio. I have equipped it with a fabrication equipment and a foundry and so forth. And I'm also starting to develop creativity workshops, which I'm going to offer from there. So, let's move on to the work here. And I think, so, most of these things I've chosen to show you are things that I have found significant in terms of my experiences growing as an artist. And this one in particular was, I did this drawing when I was working with Mike Scope, and I remember distinctly, it wasn't this drawing, but it was another one where he walked over to me, and I'd been working on a drawing for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and he went something like this. He said, "See these little lines right here?" He said, "Those have form. The rest of it is kind of garbage," he said. And So after I kind of, gathered myself together, I said to myself, well, what is he talking about? Why did he point to those lines and say the rest of it wasn't working? And that was actually the beginning of kind of an understanding of what that meant to be able to translate, to put an intangible aspect into the work. And that's, this is another piece that I did when I was studying with Mike. And I remember this day because I had a real bad headache and I felt lousy. And I did this thing in the morning, and he came down into the studio and looked at it, and he said, "Oh, that's great," And I said, "What do you mean? I was just feeling really lousy." And no, it's really good, he said. And it's one of the best pieces you've done in a long time, he said. So I said to myself, well, something that you learn from that is that you never know really what's happening in terms of your state of mind. I mean, you can direct it and be conscious of it, but there are many things happening within you, through you, that you're not aware of. And so when that need kind of strikes you to work, it's very important to act on it. And these are some pieces, for a long time, these are pieces that I would just draw in terms of, I wouldn't use a model for these. Most of the study with Mike was from the model, but as time went on, color and just these figures became really important to me. So I did a whole bunch of them.
What's the medium?
These are all pastel, yeah. Now this one, I think this was in the early 80s, and this was kind of a departure. This is one of the first, I started to work with not with figures anymore, but with just more geometric sorts of things. And I picked this piece because it was one of the first ones I remember that I decided to try something different. And part of it was the environment. I was at Syracuse at this point, and I was willing to, I left the nest of Studio 70, and so I was allowing other things to kind of wash over me in terms of just possibilities and just basically what came up. So this was the start of something here. Also, when I left Syracuse, I started welding full time, and it was exhausting. And I really, after working with metal all day long, when I get home at night, I really didn't feel like doing more sculpture. So I decided it'd be a good time to develop, or at least to look into color. So for about 2 years, this is very small. This is about, I don't know, maybe about 7 or 8 inches by 10 inches, something like that. But I would take pieces of Color Aid paper, which is a really high quality silkscreen paper, and just move these things around very subtly to get a sense of just how just subtle movements and subtle amounts of colors would affect the total balance. So it was a real eye opener. And so I do one of these every night. Just come home and just move it around, and it really taught me a lot about color in general. This is a little later, and the mandala, the circle, is something I remember. The first one I did was probably in the early 70s, but it just comes back to me every now and then. Maybe because something inside is saying you need to be a little more grounded and so forth. But this one I picked because there's some of these little elements that I started to do some stuff on the computer and then print it out. It was the first real attempt at that, and that's kind of an ongoing investigation for me in terms of that technology, how you can still maintain kind of an integrity with feeling, and yet work with a tool that's as sophisticated as a computer. So, and this is also this we're talking late 80s, early 90s around there. But oops. I started working with Kaz Tanahashi, who's a Japanese brush artist, and I've taken some workshops with him. And that influence has really stayed with me. I really love the brush. I'm not interested in learning the characters and so forth, but I am interested in terms of the brush and its expressive potential. So a lot of the work that I've done, I just have a natural feel for it, and I've continued to use it. And again, this is a mandala. Sometimes I'll do things like I'll set up a problem where I'll limit myself to maybe 10 or 12 decisions, and then try to arrange a balance within that kind of limited amount of selection. And one thing I learned from Mike was to continually test the limits and what you know, and to push out in terms of finding new things, discovery. So that's, I think, a very important thing to do. These are some around the same time, and this was kind of a mandala form. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay. This is a spiral, and this I think this is 2004 actually. I decided that I needed to just concentrate on one form for a while. And it's a funny thing. I mean, it's hard to believe that this is the first time I was able to really do that. I have a strong tendency just to jump around a lot and just do exactly what I feel on any given day. But I decided I was going to set up a challenge for myself to use the spiral and do a piece basically every day, which I was able to do. And like I said, it was the first time I was able to do that ever in my life. And it taught me so many things about endurance, about stamina, but also in terms of how to develop things in a different way. And so most of these are collages. There's some brush, there's paint, there's cut paper and so forth in them, and these are different. This is more recent one, but it was very interesting experience. The following year, this was 2004, this was in 2005, I decided to do mandalas, and this one actually has some copper in it, which is kind of a challenge to work with. But so I spent the next year just working with circular designs, and looking back and looking at some of these again, it's interesting to see that kind of ebb and flow in terms of moods, in terms of just what was happening in my life. And these are some of the other ones that came from that series. Okay. And then the next year I started getting more into photography. And I can really thank Dido for that, because he offered photography workshops. And I really quite didn't get photography to that point. And his approach to it was quite interesting. The thing that he emphasized over and over again was that you don't look to take a picture of something, you allow the subject to find you. And it really kind of shifted my whole sense of what that meant, and also what it meant to go out and look for things. And through that training, you realize that a photograph is never an absolute thing. There's always this element of expression that seeps into that. So I spent good part of the year doing these collages based on photographs. Dido has a book out that showcases his photographs at Point Lobos out in California, just below Carmel. It's a very interesting place. And so 2007 I went out there and went to the same place and took a lot of photos, and this was my response to that. It was really, really breathtaking. And actually, Big Sur, who drove down there, and so I did a whole series of collages based on the photographs and interaction of other elements of materials and so forth. This is a series I'm working on. I pick it up sometimes, let it go. It's called the Chanting Buddha series, and what's been interwoven in many ways in terms of the themes or the orientations of my work are certainly a response to the Zen Buddhist interaction with art, and that's a long tradition. And also in terms of how Zen has affected the arts wherever it's gone. So I've been using the computer. This is actually now a bronze relief, but this is a photograph of it when it was in clay, and I use that and make these. I think I've done about 40 or 50 of these altogether, and my goal is to make 100. is the Chanting Buddha series. Also, and again, the experience at Zen Mountain Monastery has allowed me to re-experience a lot of things. I hadn't camped in a long time, and they have a very extensive environmental program there, and have a place, a small cabin up in the Adirondacks, Raquette Lake. So I went on a number of excursions up there. This one, it was a hermitage, and a hermitage in a traditional Zen training is when you go off into a cabin or someplace by yourself for a certain amount of days. Usually standard about 7 days. This was 5 days where I just was dropped off at this little peninsula with my tent and all that kind of stuff, and for 5 days I just basically, got really grounded where I was. And what I did was did a lot of drawings, but these drawings are from different points of view. So in other words, this was I think was the east, and this was I think south, and this was north, and that was it. Anyways, this is a drawing of John Dadalori, and this was during a retreat. That's another ongoing theme of my work. I've been drawing portraits, also drawing musicians. And I have a series that I'm working on. This is happening to Sonny Rollins, but where I've been dragging my sketchbook to concerts since, I don't know, early 70s. So I have all these drawings of, I like to, in addition to working in the studio, I like to get out there and draw from life. I think it's a very important thing in terms of the practice of any artist's activity is to interact with life. I mean, I don't look at these just as drawings. I look at them as ways that I can sharpen or deepen my sense of the space around me. Really, it's still life. So I still keep this up, as well as doing some non-representational drawings. This one actually, Kathy my wife has a twin brother, and this was a gift. I've been working on a series of bronze reliefs, and I've got about 15, 20, something like that I've done over the years. But this one I gave to him, and he had it hanging in his barn, and I forget when it was, but the barn burned down, and completely. And they were sifting through the rubble, and there's the relief, made it through. So it says something, I'm not sure what. This is another, this one's actually cast aluminum. And these were made in the bonded sand method. I modeled them in a plasticine to begin with, and made a mold, and then cast. In this case, aluminum, but the other ones were bronze. This is the Chanting Buddha. This is actually the bronze photograph. This one is bronze as well, and it's called the Dokusan. And Dokusan is one of the practices that you do in Zen, where you have a face-to-face meeting with a teacher, and it's very interesting because it's very intense, and you meet with that person one-on-one in a room and so forth, and that face-to-face confrontation is really fertile ground for a lot of amazing things. This piece was done in Syracuse in the early '80s, and the reason I included it was because. First of all, this piece of rebar, I don't know if anyone has any sports awareness, but it came from the old Archibald Stadium. That's where Jimmy Brown and Ben Schwartzwalder, the mythical coach and player from Syracuse, played. And so I'm pretty proud of that, for one thing. But also, the Clement Greenberg was really a very famous critic, was an alum of Syracuse. And he used to come every year and give a lecture there. So I got a chance to meet him and so forth. And it was one year when I was a second year as a graduate student where he toured the studios, and he came into my studio and sat down and looked at this piece, and he said to me, if I went into a gallery and I saw that piece, I'd ask who that artist was. And I said, well, that's pretty good. He said, except, you see this stuff in here, you got to take that out. And Clement Greenberg was kind of notorious for working with artists and kind of directing them. In fact, he did that on a pretty large scale, which was kind of an interesting thing in some ways. So he said, I'm going to stop at the MFA show. Graduation show was coming up, and he said, I'm going to stop by and see how you work this out, and see it in the show. So he left, and of course I didn't know what to do. What should I do? This guy told me to change this. This was a finished piece, it's a reflection of my feeling at that time. So it was a real dilemma, and this is the dilemma that every artist faces. You know, when you encounter, the opinions of others and how you base your decisions and all that stuff. So in the end, I didn't change it. I put it in there. I said, well, I'm just going to put it in the way it is because that was my piece. So I saw him, I don't know, a couple weeks after the show, and I said, did you stop by the show? He said, oh, no, I didn't have time. Anyways. And some of the things, particularly my sculpture that I've been working on, involve Buddhist themes. And this is actually a stupa. And a stupa, it means, in Sanskrit, it means to pile on, to heap up. And there's a long tradition of stupas. In this case, it's more, I think, an homage to the infinite, so to speak. But it's kind of a totemic kind of form. And there's some cast elements right in here. And, I'll loosely borrow certain things, but don't feel real tied to it, And so I have a number of these that I've been working on and developing, so this is another one. And also some altars. This was in a show, and the traditional altar has incense, flowers, candle, and a Buddha image. And so, let's see. This is actually going to be at Rumsey Hall. This is a I Ching Mandala piece, and the 6 floating things there on that screen are for the lines of the hexagram and the circle and so forth. And I thought it would be a good thing to get into the vocabulary of Rumsey Hall. And this is a more recent piece, and this is kind of typical of the way that I work. I collect a lot of odd things and like to weld them together. I'm planning to get a little more back into fabrication, which means to take flat sheets and make things out of them, but I really love to just put things together, and weight of things, more of a collage kind of. Oops, sorry, this is a little bit off here. But this is a slide of the studio, and the reason I included these was because this has been like a 20-year project, and it's really a good example when you start blurring the image between architecture, function, and art, because it's still not done, but I built it pretty much myself, and I just, it's a big sculpture, basically, what it is. But I use it all the time, of course. And there's another shot. And this is actually the foundry over here is the addition. This is the inside of the upstairs now. I've just finished this summer. And this is where I'm planning to have workshops and creativity and so forth. And this is, but it's kind of a space upstairs that's a little more quiet, that's a little dust-free and contemplative, really. Again, I apologize. So that's within that building. Okay. So I'm not going to go too much further. Should I go a little further?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to, before I open up for questions, I just want to run over a few things in terms of the creative process. And in terms of my experience and what I've read, the creative process can be broken down into six aspects. First one is the arising, inspiration, and so forth. What you feel, what you see in terms of the intangible entrance of feeling. For many people, this can vary in terms of the sensitivity they have, but part of it is, as I mentioned earlier, this grounding in silence allows you to see these subtle kind of movements. And the more that you start to work towards that, the subtler it gets. Okay? It is said that infinitely subtle, and I think that's true. So in terms of understanding the creative process, you need to prepare yourself to be receptive to these things. That's the first stage. The second stage is this precognition stage where you know something's happening, but you don't really have the thoughts to articulate what's going on. You feel something. You can describe that as sensation, whatever you want. But it is an aspect that becomes much more connected to your state of mind. Then you say, oh, this is a feeling of whatever. If you're working with painting, you might start to translate that feeling to a particular color. A very famous quote by Matisse in terms of how he describes his color theory, which is to find the color that fits the sensation. And that's exactly what he's talking about. Once that cognition gets into play, then the next step, of course, is how you're going to express it. I'm going to put this color here with my brush. So there's a very conscious thought process that carries that out. What happens after that is as you start to reflect back on what you've done, you go through an editing process, and the final stage is letting go. Right? So the thing of it is, it's important to remember, people ask a lot in terms of, for instance, how to assess creativity. I mean, you always have to ask, what part are you talking about? There's certain parts of it that can be assessed very directly. Other parts, assessing it is just not possible. Very important, I think, just in terms of the creative process, to look at it in its entirety, as an all-inclusive thing. These six steps that I mentioned are important to identify, but never at the expense of seeing the total wave of what the creative process really is. In terms of the stages, the first stage, in terms of your own ability to utilize it, is first of all is to see what's going on. Right? It's not just seeing with your physical eye, but also seeing with your internal eye, whatever that means and whatever that is. The fact is that awareness allows you to be not only present and attentive to what's going on, but also to see into it, to see exactly what's happening. See. The next step is expressing, being able to let that out. It's not enough just to feel it. You have to allow it to find ways in order to put it out. Put it out with your words, put it out with your media, put it out with just your presence. After that, you have to unify. It just can't be kind of random kind of expressions. There needs to be some sort of ability or sense of how to put these things together. What does that mean in terms of how you make that happen? Once that unification principle becomes a little clearer, then the idea of composing, in other words, thinking in themes, thinking in terms of movements, not just a couple things working, but things in their entirety, like a book. How is that book cohesive from start to finish? And the last stage is when it just becomes your state of mind. And really, as Dido says in his book, The Zen of Creativity, creativity is your birthright. There isn't a person here it doesn't have this quality within there. It's just a question of trying to, of allowing it to come out. What are the means? How do you do that? All those things are very important questions to ask, because part of our difficulty that I found in terms of making this happen is that people just don't know how. They think this is a great idea, yeah. As I said earlier, everybody thinks it's important. Okay, so what are you doing about it? How are you implementing these things? How are you able to facilitate the expression of this creative energy? Creativity is not chronological. Things happen only when the time is right. Very important to trust yourself. Very important quality you have to remember about creativity is that struggle is part of the deal. A lot of times I work with the kids. If something is hard, they say, "I'm terrible at this." I just had a student the other day who she was working on a drawing. The next thing I know, it was gone. I said, "What happened to it?" "Oh, I threw it in the garbage." I said, "Why?" "Well, because I'm terrible at drawing." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And of course, she was encountering difficulty. But once a person realizes that difficulty is not only part of it, but necessary in order to have something to push against, you realize that hanging in there with it, developing the endurance to do that, yields some pretty amazing results. There's an accord with all this. There's certain things you don't take a branch and plant it to get a tree. You put the seed in the ground. You water it and it grows, right? So the same with creativity. It isn't the idea first or the technical expertise first. This has to be something that is natural but cultivated in a complete way. I think I'll end with that. Is there any questions about the creative process anyone wants to ask?
I've got a question about this
Sure.
drawing.
Yeah.
Given what Mike had said. So, I've seen, you showed us some of the other drawings.
Yeah.
And the delicacy of line is so interesting juxtaposed to welding and some of the other. Do you still draw?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's kind of my nature to be all over the place with stuff, But, I mean, you think about your average day and how many different states of mind you go
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
Depending on who you're with, or what you're feeling, or what you did the night before, or what you're going to do the next day, I mean, all those things, it's a constant evolution, a constant kind of, things just ebb and flow all day long. And all those things, if you really look at it in terms of expression, have the potential to be of a certain nature.
Right.
I mean, that's one thing that Picasso realized, is that, through Cubism, is that there is no absolutes. That things are, where is that still life? Where is that face? It's a matter of things moving in time, and since that's true, the expressions are endless. So how can you say that anything is fixed? Because it isn't. I mean, a lot of times in terms of art, I've heard the argument, well, if an artist doesn't stay with one thing, they haven't really matured. I mean, there is some truth to that, but I think that Picasso in particular is a good example. I mean, overall, you see there's a continuity to his work, but man, he just was all over the place, and I'm glad he was, because there's so many different things that came out of his willingness to experiment and discover. So. Anything else? Yes, Amber. Nice to see you.
I want to know, when an adult says they're not creative, what concrete ways do you know of to get them past that?
Well, the first, most direct, concrete way is to work at it.
What medium? I mean, what?
Doesn't matter.
Something very specific.
Ambler, if I was to give you, say right now, that you're going to do some artwork, what would you like to do? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Paper.
Paper, okay. And what else?
Scissors.
Scissors,
glue.
okay. So, right there, you have used the intuitive faculty that you have to discern out of everything that's happening, very particular things to work with, right?
So turn the specific question back. I was just having this conversation with someone the other day, and they're just convinced they weren't creative at all.
Yeah, so that's not true.
So the first thing is to establish a material that they're interested in.
Maybe it's an idea, It's trusting yourself is a very important step in business, right? But also the willingness to take it up. It's hard. I don't care who it is. I mean, I just showed my class at WestCon last night, The Mystery of Picasso, and in there's a point where Picasso's working. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, where he's going through these gyrations with this one painting. It's amazing to see how many changes he goes through. And somewhere he says, this is very bad. Trey Mom, he said, very bad, right? Wait a minute. I feel like standing up and saying, you're Picasso. That shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't worry about it. But the fact of the matter is that he was a very authentic artist. And he was willing to start at square one, when necessary, or all the time. He was able to be ruthless with himself, you see, to be true, to be pure in terms of his expression. So the point is that it is a struggle. You are letting something go every time you step into that creative arena. Get used to it. Now, it shouldn't be overwhelming, so you stop. That's what I see with a lot of kids. There's certain formats that people try to lay out as being the way to do art. Right? Well, what happens if you don't have the eye-hand coordination to draw something that's representational? Well, some people might say, well, hang it up. You're not an artist, right? But that's like a sliver of the possibilities in terms of how anyone would do anything, right? So, really, what you have to do is look into yourself and realize that that creative nature, as I said, seeing that creative nature within yourselves that everyone has, and then to work at it, and not be afraid, you see, to fail or to not measure up, because that's the aspect has no measurement. I mean, if you want to be a famous artist, you want to go out there in the world, that's a whole different ballgame, But creativity is not about that in the sense of a normal functioning of a person's life, and so you need to look at it in its entirety. That the outcome is not the only game in town here. What relevance does it have to be able to freely express yourself? Well, it makes a big difference in your mental health and to your sense of balance in terms of everything that you do. No one may even hear about it, but so what? The quality of your life is what you're really working with. So Expectations have they tend to really kind of mess with the whole thing, what you want. Well, imposing your will is one thing, but as I said, in terms of studying with Dido, it's a two-way street. That subject finds you, you know what I mean? There's something else that's being open to you that you have to be sensitive to. It's not just what you want, it's what's happening you have to be aware of as well. So there's a lot of levels to it, in a way, but basically comes down to the simple fact that you need to work at it with an open mind, with a sense of really kind of what the process is in its entirety. I mean, another thing, just to add to this, is that there's a lot of people teach art that think there's certain steps you have to go through in order to get from point A to point B. To me, all the steps need to happen simultaneously. Whatever's going on, insight, philosophy, technical, presentation, it all has to be happening at the same time. Whatever that means for that particular person, because they get used to working in that way, their habits become holistic, like the mandala, really, kind of just complete. So, is that specific enough, or can I? Anybody else? Any questions? Yeah, sure.
Could you elaborate on the final step of the creative process with the knowing when to let go?
Oh, okay. Well, there's again a very famous quote by Matisse. Someone asked him, "Well, how do you know when you're done?" And his comment was, "Well, when I've given it all I can, and I can't give anymore." That's what he would say. So what does he mean by that? I think that it's like when you eat. When you're full, no one else has to tell you. You just know, right? You're aware of it. It tends to be a little different with art, but really it's the same. But in what way are you full? What does that mean when that balance becomes a point where you realize it's on its own? I think that's something that you practice, and part of it, I think, in my case, was I was very fortunate to have teachers that would point that out to me. But still, the intuitive is a very powerful aspect of what we all have, you see. And it's not just knowing what horse to play at the aqueduct or something. It's really more about the tool that allows you to facilitate these more subtle or intangible things. And find resolution, not only with the physical balance, because we're all pretty good at that, I mean, we can figure that out in terms of, this thing is, the water is overflowing, or this is heavier than this is. But when it comes to internal weight, how do you figure that out? How do you know where the right place is? A lot of times I'll study when I teach a class. I'll study where everyone sits immediately, because it's very important for me to get to know students. It tells me something, in terms of the balance, in terms of why they're sitting over there, over here. See, there's so many different facets in terms of how a person not only is able to balance themselves physically, but also internally. That it's a very natural thing, to find some sense of completeness or certainty about that. But again, all this stuff has no end. It has no particular level or plateau where everything makes sense. Nothing is fixed. So you need to live with that uncertainty. Again, it goes back to the struggle thing. There are things that we'll never know. Mystery is part of the creative process. There's no escape from it. So the question is, how do you live with that? How do you live with knowing and not knowing at the same time? Investigating those things in a very weird way, I can't explain it, will bring resolutions to certain things, like the question that you just asked me. It's the intuitive works in, again, the best word I could find is mysterious ways. So does that make sense? Kinda?
Yeah,
Kinda.
kinda.
If you're talking to somebody, right? Like maybe all you're feeling that right now. Had enough. But, you just know when kind of it's run its course, As human beings, we have a natural sense of that. It's almost like, in a way, we need to get out of our own way. I mean, I've heard that a million times, but it's true, How we structure things, how we think, are very predicated on a lot of things we have no control over. But when you start to put effort into clarifying these things, you realize that there are things you can do, you see, to to control or to make things happen in ways that are what are more qualitative. So when it comes to doing art, I don't know how to explain it. I just know with my own work, I know when that moment occurs. I just feel it. Something just happens where I'm sure that's it, and I don't hesitate. I'm done with that thing. In that moment. Now maybe I'll go back and look at that piece 6 months later and say, geez, I was missing something there. But that doesn't matter. I can always do that. But it's so important in that moment to be clear about when that balance is reached. Because that's all you have. That's all we all have is just this very moment to work with. And I think once you start to relate to things or orient more towards that, these other things kind of just seem to make a little more sense or resolve themselves. That's been my experience. Here's how that happens for me. Anybody else?
Well, thank you.
My pleasure.